Time is not on your side. That's the shocking warning that the US has just delivered to Russia, as Ukraine's diabolical plans for destroying the Russian occupiers are becoming clearer as we move deeper into 2026. This is the last thing that Putin wanted to hear. He thought he had the US wrapped up, manipulated into pushing for a version of peace that benefits Moscow more than Kyiv. But that illusion has just been shattered, as Russia is being warned to get out now before Ukraine makes an already bad situation so much worse. Ukraine might almost start to feel sorry for Russia and the crumbling psyche of Vladimir Putin, but it will never feel sorry enough to stop the strategy that is crippling Russia. As the US Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, Dan Negrea, stood before the United Nations Security Council on June 22nd, he delivered the words that have shocked Putin to his core. Amidst a condemnation of Russia's bombing of the historic Kyiv-Pechersk-Lavra UNESCO heritage site, which is also one of the most solemn places of worship in all of Ukraine, Negrea told Russia that it was time to make a deal with Ukraine now, before time runs out and Ukraine secures the victory that seems increasingly likely as momentum has shifted away from Russia in 2026. Russia should make a deal. Time is not on Moscow's side, Negrea declared. And if Putin thinks for a second that this is just the opinion of one US representative, and that the rest still believe that Russia will win, then he is sorely mistaken. Negrea's comments come on the back of statements made by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio to the Senate earlier in June. They are not going to achieve the objectives they set out on day one, for certain, Rubio said about Russia in a statement that must have felt like a dagger to Putin's heart. Rubio added, they may not even be able to militarily ever achieve the objectives they're demanding now in negotiations. That's two major US officials who have publicly dismissed Russia's chances of winning in a matter of days. But they're not the only ones. The US president himself, Donald Trump, also seems to have come around to Ukraine being on the winning side. But we'll return to that soon. Negrea's comments were far from idle as he spoke to the UN Security Council. He said that Russia needs to make a deal now because Ukraine's diabolical strategy for dealing with Russia is working so well that some might even start to feel sorry for Putin and his ineptitude. Negrea brought up two very important factors: casualties and innovation. Both are in Ukraine's favor right now, and they have been for much of 2026. On the casualty front, Negrea points out that the Russian military is suffering somewhere in the region of 40,000 casualties, killed or wounded, every single month, which is only being exacerbated by desperate recruitment tactics that are making Russia's economic situation worse. Indeed, Russia has reached the point where it's offering record-breaking bonuses up to about $80,000 just to sign up, CNN reported on June 14th, with the Moscow Times adding a couple of weeks earlier that Putin has signed a new law that forgives up to $140,000 in debt for any Russian who signs up to be a volunteer in his military. These are acts of desperation as Russia grapples with a recruitment crisis caused by Ukraine's strategy. But Russia needs to implement them. It has no other choice. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost a little over 1.395 million soldiers as of June 24th. Back in May, the BBC revealed that almost 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in the fighting, per the GCHQ, which is the UK's leading spy agency. And according to United 24 Media, Russia's daily troop losses have far exceeded 1,000 for almost a full month for the first time since March 2025. The period between June 1st and June 22nd has seen Russia's losses range from 1,130 to 1,550 every single day, with only 3 of those 22 days seeing the losses fall into the 1,100 range rather than being much higher. This is unsustainable for Russia, and that's the entire point of Ukraine's ingenious strategy. Though it is making targeted counterattacking efforts throughout the occupied territories, Ukraine knows that it's locked into a war of attrition with Russia. Its best chance to win is to inflict so many casualties that Russia isn't able to sustain its war anymore. Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov has already made that clear, and he even has the magic number that Russia never wants to reach, 50,000 casualties per month. That, Fedorov claims, would be enough to make Russia's invasion untenable, thus forcing Putin to the negotiating table. Assuming the table is still there for him, after all, the US says that time is running out. Of course, having that target and actually reaching it are two very different things. But that's where the brilliance of Ukraine's strategy really comes into play. Innovations across the front line and beyond are what are leading Ukraine to victory, Negrea points out, and Russia simply can't keep pace with what Ukraine is doing to make its drones more lethal than ever before. Negrea isn't the only one who is pointing to Ukraine's defense industry with awe. On June 23rd, United 24 media reported that the European Union's Commissioner for Defense and Space, Andrius Kubilius, had made similar remarks. Though he hailed Ukraine's tactical leadership, Kubilius said that the agility of Ukraine's domestic manufacturing base is the main reason why Putin and his patsies find themselves in such a precarious position in Ukraine. Domestic military production has expanded 50-fold since the war, Kubilius said of Ukraine, and that volume is accompanied by Ukraine having developed a knack for creating the perfect weapons to both counter what Russia is doing and inflict yet more pain on Putin's troops. Kubilius ended his speech at the European Defence and Security Summit in Brussels by calling for the establishment of a framework that better incorporates Ukraine into the collective European defence market. And he's right to make that call. Ukraine's innovations on the battlefield are almost too numerous to count. On the front, Ukraine has developed a lethal combination of FPV and middle strike drones that allow it to strike Russian targets several hundred kilometers behind the front. The middle strikes in particular are wreaking havoc on Russia. Ukraine's logistics lockdown program is incentivizing drone crews to take out supply routes and vehicles, which in turn allows Ukraine to isolate Crimea and prevent the flow of supplies to the front. Couple that with attacks on command and control centers and other military facilities such as drone launch points, and you get a strategy that is leading to Russia's frontline attacks getting weaker. That's why we're seeing so many casualties. Russia's forces are degrading even as Putin orders them to launch more assaults as part of the Russian summer offensive. As the Council on Foreign Relations points out, drones have long dominated the front line in terms of casualties, with up to 85% of deaths and injuries on both sides being caused by flying metal. The difference now, and the crux of Ukraine's strategy, is that the swarms of FPV drones in the kill zones near the front have been bolstered by Ukraine's new ability to strike with precision in the Russian rear, both in the occupied territories and Russia itself. The Council brings up Ukraine's use of the AI-powered Hornet, which costs just $10,000 and has become key to the logistics lockdown campaign. What this new generation of drones has led to is a complete recalculation of how both sides use their resources. For Ukraine, more drones and a greater volume of strikes build on the good work already done. Russia's calculus is much simpler and by no means effective. Throwing more meat at the problem seems to be Putin's only strategy. That isn't working out too well, given Russia's recruitment challenges. And it's one of the main reasons why Negrea says that Moscow is running out of time to come to the table. Then there's US President Donald Trump. In a June 23rd report, the Financial Times revealed that the US support and praise for Ukraine's strategy extends all the way to the White House hot seat. The outlet says that Trump and Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelenskyy spoke at length during a dinner at Evian Laban earlier in June, with Trump reportedly saying that he was extremely impressed with the military results that Ukraine has managed to achieve so far in 2026. Pravda reports that Ukrainian officials have taken this as a sign that Trump is becoming more likely to provide stronger support to Ukraine, in addition to placing more pressure on Putin to end the war. Pressure is just what we've seen from Rubio and Negrea. They're both telling Russia that time is running short and that Putin needs to get out of Ukraine now before his entire reign is ruined. That meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy also produced something else that will make it even harder for Putin to achieve his goals. But before we dig into that, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, then now is the perfect time to hit that button to ensure more of our videos reach your feed. Putin is absolutely furious about all of these developments. As the US makes direct appeals for Putin to return to the negotiating table and accept the fact that Russia is in a weakened position, Putin has completely soured on Trump. Of course, Putin won't say that directly. He's too much of a coward. But he's used Russia's foreign minister and one of his many mouthpieces, Sergei Lavrov, to deliver the news. June 23rd saw Lavrov bemoan how the US is seemingly stepping back from the role of objective mediator, and that the US appears to have forgotten about the statements that Trump made in 2025, which indicated that the US was leaning toward Russia's side of things. That sounds like a Russian tantrum to us, and Putin wasn't done lambasting the US via his cronies. US news reports that the 3 days up to June 23rd have seen a trio of Russian officials complain about the US not following through. Lavrov was one of them. Before him, there was the Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov. who claimed that only Russia has remained committed to fulfilling the understanding struck with the US, while the other side, as it now appears, has not been fully able to do its part. After Lavrov complained, his deputy, Sergei Rybakov, also said that the US has departed from the fundamental understandings reached in the 2025 Alaska summit, adding, "We also see Washington's line moving closer to the most rabid anti-Russian policies pursued by the US's closest European allies, namely the UK and France." Lavrov has followed up on his comments, noting that any hope that the US could be an honest mediator has collapsed, meaning that Russia will be forced to continue the invasion. The blatant hypocrisy in these comments is astounding. All that Russia is doing here is throwing a Kremlin-wide tantrum over the fact that Putin feels he can no longer manipulate the US into taking his side. All of the lies about Russia's progress and supposedly inevitable victory in Ukraine have been exposed by the ingenious strategy that has led to Ukraine seizing the initiative in the war. The US has recognized the impact of the strategy, and Putin is getting desperate, so he's started projecting. The Financial Times reports that Putin delivered an address to military graduates on June 23rd. During his speech, Putin claimed that Ukraine's middle and long-range strikes were the real act of desperation, as Ukraine was unable to stop Russia's advances on the front. These drones, strikes on civilian infrastructure, what are they for? To destabilize society and create some sort of uncertainty about the Russian armed forces' actions. Putin said in a tone-deaf speech that ignores Russia's tactics for the entire war and was delivered to soldiers that he will soon be sending to die on the front lines. Of course, it's all nonsense. Russia has actually lost a lot of ground in 2026, with both April and May being months where Ukraine scored net territory victories over Russia, per the Institute for the Study of War. Putin's problem now is that the alternate reality he is trying to conjure out of thin air doesn't jive anymore. The US sees through it. So does Europe, and even more damaging for Putin, so do many inside Russia. On May 22nd, the New Voice of Ukraine reported that Russian officials have started preparing for a world after Putin, as they believe the system of government he has created, up to and including his invasion of Ukraine, can no longer survive. Children are being moved abroad as officials fear they'll be subject to criminal cases if they stick around. One unnamed official summed up the mood in Russia's mid-level and upper echelons, stating, "These are difficult times. That's now obvious, and there is no point in lying." Yet still, Putin and his cronies lie. But now they're doing it out of desperation and anger, rather than because they believe the lies will bring the US back on side. And Putin should be angry. Beyond all of the US claims that Putin should give up now, as well as Trump's glowing endorsement of Ukraine's military strategy, there is one thing above all else that has Putin red in the face: the Patriot games. If you thought that Trump praising Ukraine's strategy was the big news to come out of his meeting with Zelenskyy, then you are mistaken. Zelenskyy reported that in the wake of his meeting with Trump, both the US president and Rubio had responded positively to the idea of issuing licenses for European defense companies to start building Patriot missile interceptors. This is huge. Zelenskyy said that this is the first time that the US has responded positively to the idea, adding that Ukraine's European partners have the technical capabilities to do it, and that what is needed now is President Trump's personal approval. Bloomberg reports that the idea of licensing Patriot missiles to manufacturers outside of the US was also on Trump's mind during the Group of Seven summit in France. The outlet claims that Trump is now actively planning on asking US defense manufacturers to license the technology for Patriot missiles to European countries and Ukraine, which would allow Ukraine to address the shortage of Patriot missiles that has allowed Russia to find some success with its ballistic missiles in recent months. They would like to be able to do it. We'll take a look at it, Trump told reporters on June 17th. And the subject of licenses was apparently discussed in detail behind closed doors at the meeting. If the US telling Putin that it was time to get out of Ukraine felt like a solid body blow, this revelation is a lethal haymaker delivered right to the Russian leader's temple. Russia's aerial campaign is all that it has going for it anymore. Failure on the ground and an inability to protect Crimea aren't doing much to win the war for Russia. But as Ukraine has started to run low on Patriot missile interceptors, Russia's cruise and ballistic missiles have been finding their targets more often. We saw this clearly in May. That month saw Russia launch 8,351 aerial assets at Ukraine, Pravda reports. That was a record, and Ukraine's air defenses struggled to cope with the missiles. Of the 8,351 assets, 8,150 were strike drones, against which Ukraine recorded an impressive interception rate of 91.73%. However, the percentage drops much lower when talking about the 211 cruise and ballistic missiles that Russia launched. as Ukraine was only able to stop 53% of them. Having a steady supply of Patriot missiles will bump Ukraine's missile interception rate up substantially. That's why Trump being open to licensing deals is so important to Ukraine and so devastating to Putin. The US was supposed to be on his side. Until very recently, it seems that all of the pressure was being placed on Ukraine to make a deal. But now the US is telling Putin that his time is running short, and it's gearing up to allow for the external manufacture of a weapon that will ruin Russia's strategy of inflicting terror on Ukraine to sap its morale. If Russia's missiles are getting intercepted, then what does Russia have left? It certainly isn't making progress on the ground, and its soldiers are being torn up by Ukraine's brilliant drone strategy. There is a nice little coda to all of this. As Putin is being drowned out by voices on both sides of the pond telling him that it's time to give up on his goal of invading Ukraine after almost 4.5 years of failure, Ukraine's United Nations envoy Andriy Melnik has echoed the calls and revealed to Putin what his legacy will really be when all of this is said and done. Putin will go down as one of the darkest figures of modern history, especially following the strike against Kyiv's Pechersk-Lavra, and his legacy will be nothing more than that of a war criminal who failed in all that he has attempted to accomplish. So, addressing the Russian representative, I can give you one piece of advice. You will never be able to hold the occupied lands, never. So get out of Ukraine as quickly as possible before it's too late, Melnik roared during his speech. And if that warning isn't heeded, then Russia should really start paying attention to what's happening. The boomerang of war unleashed by Mr. Putin has returned to Russian territory, and for the first time, Russians are feeling the dark breath of this war, Melnik said before concluding with words that echoed through the UN halls. And that is just the beginning. It's hard to argue the point. With the US, Europe, and even officials in Russia itself all seeing the writing on the wall, Putin is running out of options. The only choice that makes sense is to do what everybody is telling him to do and get out of Ukraine. Will Putin do it? Probably not. But if he remains as stubbornly ignorant of reality as he has been for the entire war, he'll only lead his country to succumbing to a Ukrainian strategy that has already shifted the momentum, has been lauded by the entire West, and will soon lead to Russia losing the war that was supposed to be over in days. Putin can already see what Ukraine's strategy is doing to Crimea, which is the crown jewel of the Russian occupation. At least he should be seeing it. Putin's head might be so deeply buried in the sand, or perhaps up somewhere else, that he doesn't know what's really happening. But that doesn't change the reality. Crimea is being lost, and 1.5 million Russians now regret being on the peninsula. Find out why by watching our video, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show. We publish videos daily, analyzing the latest developments in the Ukraine war and beyond. And thank you for watching.